in case this is the first time anybody is joining me. My name is Giselle Noel, and I've written a book called Nagging Thoughts from a Proverbs 27:16 woman. It's based on my experience with 18 years of marriage to someone with a secret sex addiction. And unfortunately, despite receiving roughly 2.5 years total of Christian marriage counseling, nobody was able to come close to exposing this truth in my marriage. So I've written the book with the intention of hopefully bringing comfort to those that are likewise being crushed within the Christian marriage construct. And also, I hope to bring conviction to those that are either negligently or willfully crushing others within the Christian marriage construct. So I have critically analyzed some of the best-selling Christian marriage theology that is out there with the intention of those two end goals. So I'm doing the live stream so that hopefully I can get your input, your feedback, your challenges, and questions. So please feel free to throw those out. Typically, every episode I'm doing more or less a Bible study of a particular verse that was brought out to bring me conviction or comfort as a result of what I experienced in my marriage and marriage counseling. But this week, what I want to do is I really want to share with you the motivation behind my nagging thoughts and why I am going up against a brick wall to try to get this book published. So I want to tell you about my very last round of Christian marriage counseling with a pastor and his wife that actually married my husband, my ex-husband, and I nearly 18 years prior to this first session of our last round of Christian marriage counseling. Just to give you kind of the setup of where my head was at as this session was beginning, I want to share with you that at the time, the main way that I was making money was as a dog walker. I was producing comedy videos, and the main source of income for me was walking dogs. So this counseling session was scheduled via Skype with, again, this missionary pastor and his wife that were abroad. And I had to walk dogs that morning. So the night before, my husband, it was a Friday night, my husband had decided to go out after work. And even though he had started to stay out late, typically around 2 o'clock at that time, for whatever reason, that night when 2 o'clock hit, I said out loud in my bed as I could not sleep, knowing that I had to get up early to walk dogs, "He's not coming home." And he didn't. And I had no reason to say those words to myself aloud because the only pattern that he had recently established was that he didn't come home until around 2 o'clock. But for whatever reason, I spoke those words aloud, and somehow, even though I was crushed in spirit, I was able to go to sleep. And I believe that God was preparing me for what I was about to walk through, which was exponentially more difficult than that. Because my husband did not come home. And when I left for work in the morning, he still had not come home. So this was my last-ditch effort to save my marriage. I had already wanted to reach for the divorce ejector button because things had devolved so much. And it was really my sister who had encouraged me to reach out to these missionaries as a last-ditch effort to save my marriage. So as I was walking these dogs in the morning, I was just pumped full of adrenaline and rage and sorrow and just overcome with emotion because my husband had not come home. And I do want to share with you that I was still naive enough to believe that my husband was still honest and faithful with me. I suspected he was just descending into alcoholism. I had no idea what was really going on. But in any case, I couldn't sustain living like this. So my mind was racing on how I was going to get out, how I was going to be able to take care of the dog, how I was going to be able to support that and keep my business in, even though I knew that in order to do that, I'd have to live near my dog so I could take care of him during the day, but I couldn't afford to live in that same neighborhood on the income of my income alone. So all these logistics are running through my brain. Then when I come home, about a half an hour before this first session of our last round of marriage counseling, I come home and I find my husband sitting there, and he looks genuinely heavy-hearted. And he apologized and gave me, a story that, he fell asleep and his battery died, which honestly, even at the time, it just sounded like a ridiculous lie to me. But because, as a good Christian wife, I had been trained, do not challenge the husband. You must respect the husband. You must honor him. And even though it's not taught with that tyrannical tone, the message is nonetheless just as tyrannical. I don't care how nicely you focus on respect the man and submission. If that's your paradigm for a marriage, is duty and honor and obedience, it becomes a real oppression. And that's what it was. So I did not challenge him. I exercised my trust and my respect and my love. And I said, okay. And I thought perhaps we would get to the bottom of it in the marriage counseling session, which now was about to start in 15 minutes. So that's where my head was at. I was just overcome with emotion and trying to figure out logistics on how I was going to survive, knowing that I could not count on this marriage or this current situation to survive, and that we still had a very elderly sick dog that needed to be taken care of that I did not trust him to take care of since he wasn't coming home at night, etc. So that's where my head was at. And when we started the marriage session, we actually started it with a shaming of me, because I had challenged the counselors on a few points. But in order to move the conversation forward to the topic at hand, which was our marriage, I just simply apologized for, whatever I had done to offend or hurt the pastor and his wife, so that we could concentrate on the marriage that was in crisis. And even though I don't think that was appropriate on their part to focus on that and lead out our marriage counseling session with a shaming of me, I don't regret those apologies that I offered them, because I am not a perfect person. And even though I feel like I'm speaking the truth, I do recognize that I may not speak it in love. And you can call me out on that, and I will apologize for that, because even I still care about other people's feelings, even if they're in the wrong. But I'm not going to back down from the truth just because you get your feelings hurt and you're offended. In any case, once we got past all of that nonsense, I still was naive enough to think that they were going to give me a fair shake here in this marriage counseling. So I let them lead the session, and they started with this topic of love and respect, which I'm quite familiar with because they had recommended this material in the book repeatedly throughout the years, and I did read it, I did listen to it, and at the time I couldn't find what the flaws were with it, but there was something that kind of struck me as not quite right, although it did seem like it was appealing to the authority of Scripture, so I submitted myself to it. But in any case, we started on the topic of love and respect. And just overwhelmed with emotion, I remember we were on our Skype session, and I had tears streaming down my face. And I was just pumped with just rage and sorrow. And I couldn't even look them in the eye or at the screen. I had my eyes closed, just crying with my fists clenched and my teeth gritted. And I said, I believe my husband loves me. I just feel so disrespected. And my expectation in sharing my feelings was that the next step that we would go to is to explore why I might feel like that. And that would be the follow-up question. But that's not what happened. These people in ministry that are very that I respected, and I do still have respect that I believe they were doing their best with the theology that they had in order to try to help me and my husband and our marriage. So I do respect that, but they really just had no respect for women, because they had reduced marriage to respect for men and love for women. And so here's what they thought was the loving thing. As I'm crying and in humiliation, sharing my feelings, they both responded simultaneously by laughing at me. Oh, you need sex abuse camp. That's what the pastor's wife said. That's the problem. And I have to tell you, that being their reaction, my emotions were immediately crushed under the weight of my confusion. All I could say was, what? And I let them speak, and the pastor's wife said that I needed to go to sex abuse camp. It's like a 2-week program or more, and she would even go with me. And I know that this was a very loving offer in their mind. But here's the thing. I have not been sexually abused. I don't have molestation in my history. I don't have a rape in my history. And yet, my mind was blowing like a plastic bag in the wind. These are the people of God, representing God's word, here to help my marriage, and they're telling me, my husband has so little to do with the problems in my marriage that I alone need to be sent away and fixed. I was racing my mind trying to figure out why listening to other women's stories of personal sexual trauma would help me. Were they trying to say that I am too insensitive and that perhaps I need to hear what real trauma sounds like to recognize how ridiculous my angry tears are? Or perhaps listening to that, it would give me more compassion for the pastor and his wife and their feelings, and my husband and his need for respect. I knew that these were implied false accusations that they were launching at me, and yet I was so flabbergasted and so confused. I was unable to share with them what had actually happened leading up to this marriage counseling session. It was only after I announced my decision to divorce that my husband finally started to come clean. And the reason why he didn't come home is it doesn't take a genius to figure this one out. I'm sure everybody else already knew when I said he didn't come home that obviously he spent the night with another woman. But thanks to unconditional respect theology and the focus on headship and submission, I didn't even know my husband was dating and that he had multiple long-term relationships with other women, that he was holding me up to those expectations of fantasy. I had no idea. And this is the community of people that profess to worship the truth, the source of truth personified, like the same thing for love. Our God, Jesus, it says that he is love. Like those who do not know love, they do not know God, because God is love. And he is the way, the truth, and the life. And yet there was so much interest in propping up man within the construct of marriage that those things for God's glory were thrown to the side. And it's an absolute travesty. And here's why I really am motivated to share my story, is that in that moment, and actually not in that moment, it was retrospectively afterwards when I was trying to make sense of this moment with these counselors in this session, that I realized how evil it is that if particularly, and I think this can be true for both men and women, and I think that there's a lot of blindness and sexism that people don't even think that men have been sexually abused, which a significant portion of the population, of the male population, has also suffered sexual abuse. But in any case, I think that this is the way that dynamics work. This is something that disproportionately affects women. But here's what I learned in this experience, is that if a woman has sexual abuse in her past, people that she loves, trusts, and respects may use that as a weapon against her to psychologically beat her down, so that if she complains about anything in marriage, then it's going to be redirected to her and be like, girl, you got female hysteria because you're damaged goods. And what the functional effect of that is that you're saying, hey, somebody in your past disrespected you, so therefore we're not going to respect a thing you say. Everything that comes out of your mouth is rooted in your unhealed past traumas. And here's the really evil thing about that is that, although it was very clearly a false accusation in my case, which is why I honestly think God allowed me to endure this, because I have irrefutable solid ground to stand on, and I welcome any challenges to anybody who thinks that I'm off on this. But it is entirely possible that if somebody does have sexual trauma or any abuse in their history, physical, mental, etc., it is very possible that they are projecting those things onto their spouse unfairly. It is also possible, just as my case demonstrates very clearly, that whatever happened in the past really is irrelevant and is not what's going on in the marriage. There is genuine disrespect coming from one spouse to the other, and not everything's equal opposite. Sometimes somebody's getting hammered down. And we need to recognize all these variables and not just impose systematic theology on people and stereotypical things that may be helpful to 80% of people or whoever knows what the percentages are. We need, if we worship the truth, we need to do our due diligence and judge people fairly. And I want people to recognize both the victims of abuse and those that are in close relationships with those that have abuse in their past, that going to that as your solution, that, hey, this person, we can't take their emotions seriously or their demands in a relationship to be respected seriously because they have been abused in the past. That should be the absolute last place that you go, because somebody like that could indeed be healed, and that it is not actually impacting the marriage, and the spouse is abusing them in different ways, emotionally or what have you. And we're not going to get to it because you're projecting this narrative on them. But when you project that narrative on them, you might actually trigger an episode of PTSD, and they might actually then go into a hysterical mode where things are irrational. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, oh, the woman's crying and she's angry. She's irrational. Female hysteria. Debbie Downer. What's the other? Negative Nelly. It's all these like sexist things to say, be silent, woman, and be happy. My eyes were blind to this. I knew that there were lots of false accusations of sexism against complementarians, but this experience opened my eyes that there are many very valid accusations of sexism within complementarianism, because there is a desire to honor man and not God in it. And that's the problem. Okay, so that is my motivation and why I am adamant on sharing my story, because I'm not healed, and although I'm sure I still have more healing to do, and not because I'm trying to get justice and I can't move on, etc. It's because I know that other women are being absolutely abused mentally to where they don't know what they can trust. And I got to tell you, the most natural response to all of this is to wash your hands of it. And I have to tell you, I'd asked myself that. I said to myself, if this is how God is towards women in marriage, if this is an accurate representation of His Word, I have two options. I can embrace the fact that I don't deserve respect and try to deal with that. Or I can wash my hands of it, and I can say, well, if that's how God wants it, you have your God. I'm going to go on my own way and find my own religion and make myself my own God in some way, shape, or form. But in God's grace, He challenged me to search His Word and prove that this is not an accurate reflection of His Word. And that is the purpose of my book, is to bring honor to my God, who is impartial and yet compassionate. And I am so grateful for that, because without God, there's no way I would have ever made it through this extended assault on my mind and my heart and, yes, my faith. And if people, other believers out there, care about the truth, the way, the truth, the life, and God, who is love, I really hope that they would care to hear what I have to say, even though it's negative, even though I'm criticizing, and even though I should just be happy and move on and be silent. I hope that there are other people out there that care about God enough to stand up and give a voice to those who are on in gray areas and don't have solid ground to stand on, to challenge and stand up against this type of abuse. So that is where my heart is at, and I wanted to share that with you. I go into much more detail in the book. So I do want to share with you some of the best ways you can help support me getting this book published is please watch this on Amazon Prime. It's free for you, and it helps generate revenue for me. If you would also, another way that you can support me is just send a gift through PayPal. You can find links and suggestions. I have subscriptions available on other platforms. There's different ways that you can help. But honestly, just share my content, because you might put salve on a wound for somebody and take the blinders off for somebody else. That's my hope. So that's all I really wanted to share today. And I do thank you guys again for your time. And I hope to see you next week. All right. God bless.